The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Welcome back to the Horror Academic, and today we're going to have a very special guest on the show, and I know all my guests are special, but Alison is a very close friend, and this is her first time on the show, so this is very special to me because she's a high-level movie geek. We geek out many times on the movies we love, and here's a movie that we both love together, and that's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Is this where I hold up
Movie twins.
Wait, hold on.
I can't hold up all the things. I don't have room on the camera. There's more.
Right.
All right, there's more coming.
I'm hugging it. I'm loving it forever.
This is how much we love, right? And we love together some of these movies, and this is one of them that we totally love together, right?
Victoria, I think it's safe to say that I have oceans of love for this film. As a quick little reference to the movie, you may remember that for a long period of time, I signed all my cards that way. And also, when I'm able to get autographs personalized by celebrities I like, I have two versions of this. Both people are not at all tied to this film. I had them write Oceans of Love.
Even though they have nothing to do with
They have nothing to do. One is the Boulet Brothers, the drag act that I love, and they have played some of the soundtrack in some of their digital drag shows.
They are very hard.
So it's like a little nod.
Must have known.
Yeah. And then another was for the band, the Dresden Dolls, when they reunited, which I don't know if maybe Brian has seen it, but maybe not. Maybe they both did back in the 90s. But either way, I had to have them say Oceans of Love because it's like a thing for me, just for me.
This is a movie that is very important.
There's the geek in this that goes beyond that. Hopefully your fans will appreciate coming from me.
But and I want to approach something that I think some people who watch the show might be thinking right now. Okay, some of the films we've discussed so far are like Night of the Living Dead, Nightbreed, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Jaws. Mm-hmm. These are some hardcore horror films. Jaws, I know, gets some flack for not being horror, but it's a horror movie, people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Some people are going to say, but Bram Stoker's Dracula, is that really a horror movie? Okay, it's a movie about a vampire. Mm-hmm. It may be a classy movie, guys, but it's still a horror movie. I know.
Now, when you say that, I'm also going to add, it's also, for me, a love story, big time.
It totally is a love story. And I can say the same thing. And this is total 90s kids, us, growing up 90s. Sure. The Crow gives me the same emotional feelings. Totally.
Yes, exactly. When people talk about love stories or when there's the cliche of, what cliche girly film do you like or romantic, whatever, I was like, my favorite love story is Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
And that's what I'll say in conversation with like fairly normal people. And they're like, I was like, yep, anyway, so sorry. Not sorry. I was like, but if you're going to ask me, I'm giving you the truth. And this is what I consider a love story. It's tragic and it makes me cry every time. I don't have a dry eye I can't tell you how many times I've watched it, but I can tell you that every time I'm crying at the end, legit. Like it's always brought out the same emotion. So,
I mean, I think it's fair to say, I think my audience knows that I'm not a rom-com person.
It's safe to say with the Jason mask in the back.
Right. And I mean, I don't necessarily consider you a rom-com kind of gal either.
I'd say next to The Princess Bride, which is definitely more traditional, this is my second favorite love story.
Right. I might personally, because of my indie film side, I always go Before Sunrise as my little romance film.
Yes. I love that about you, by the way.
And I mean, it's a Linklater
Vic's really a romantic, everyone. Secrets coming out.
But this is my kind of romance. This is like that love never dies. It's everything, but it's whatever is romance to us, right? And it comes out in the films we love. So
it so does.
Let's talk a little bit. There could be some people out there that are not as familiar with this film as they probably should be.
I believe they're probably younger than us.
Probably.
I've brought that up a few times to the youth, and they're like, "Huh?" I'm like, "No, watch it."
Yeah, it's totally. And I unfortunately, I think it is definitely because of when it came out.
Yes.
And also for horror fans, particularly where most vampire films, most Dracula films are very targeted and marketed as horror films. One of the things I wanted to say was important about why this movie is so powerful is because it was in a period where Hollywood was anti-horror.
Yes, exactly.
There was nothing in the marketing that said horror film. It talked about, erotic thrillers and
Gothic love stories.
Yes. All these words that they could pour out there.
They couldn't use the H word, even though the trailers were full of blood and like the big tagline was beware. Besides Love Never Dies, beware was like the second main message for the tagline to sell the film.
Right. I mean, the man.
Right. I didn't even think of that.
He's a shapeshifter. He's a full-on vampire shapeshifter. He becomes many incarnations that include a werewolf, a Batman, no pun intended, a rat man, green mist, amongst
fire.
All these things. Yes, he's all of these things. There's blood everywhere. People are bit. Of blood. And it's still, they would not use the word horror to describe this at all. Another film that I know you love, even more than I love, that is in this time period and classified this way is Silence of the Lambs, which we will...
That will be another episode.
Yes, that will be an episode that we will do together.
We'll say hello to Anthony Hopkins, who ties both of them in.
And it's funny to see...
It's especially why he got this role, too.
Right. But it's funny to see now how Silence of the Lambs is still considered a classic. And it has that... It instantly had that kind of modern classic because of the way that it kind of overtook film at the time.
Yeah.
So most people know him as a villain, but he is in his own way, because he's not a traditional hero, but he is in his own way one of the heroes of this film.
Yeah, exactly.
Anthony Hopkins as a good guy. That's another thing that this is kind of a rarity to think of in those terms of a horror film. But that's the other way I see how those two films definitely tie together in the 90s, where they were both fighting so hard in their ad campaigns to make you forget that you were going to go watch a horror movie.
Because horror was still labeled again as like cheap and crass.
Right.
It didn't get its like, it didn't have its Scream resurgence yet.
Right.
Where everyone's like, oh, this is good and bankable and it's made well. We never paid attention.
And if you were part of the Fango generation that I was growing up reading Fangoria, and I was reading Fangoria about Dracula. I remember articles about that.
I can imagine, yeah.
It was trying to get around the fact, and I've read interviews recently with people who worked on the magazine who did those interviews on set, and how the producers would not use the H word,
Wow.
So just to know.
That's wild.
A little time frame of the film.
Yeah. This is what the 90s were like.
Yes, it was a weird time to be a fan of almost everything that it is okay to be a fan of now.
Oh, man, that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, everything that I love is kind of, and cherished, that I cherished at that time in the 90s when I was a teenager. Today, you get applauded for. And
it's celebrated beyond, and it's everywhere you look.
Right.
It's memes, it's on mugs, it's on a sock, it's on leggings. Like everywhere I turn, you're like, let's say you're like top 3 murder guys.
Yeah.
It's like Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers are like, hey. And then,
everybody knows it now.
Yeah, everyone knows it and they love it. I was like, oh, wow, all right.
So just to remind you guys who may have not been part of the scene back then, that's what it was like for us. So let's get some details out of the way as far as the movie and its history. First and foremost, the director is Francis Ford Coppola, who...
Applause.
Seriously, guys. Coppola making a horror film is a great, great thing.
It's a big deal.
Not that he's a man scared of genres. And we have to remember that even though they are considered modern classics of cinema, regardless of the topics. The Godfather, crime, mafia, mobster, syndicate, that's a genre, right? Yeah. Apocalypse Now, one of the greatest movies of this modern period.
Exactly.
It's a war film. It's a Vietnam film. It's another genre film. So he's a man who loves genre work and grew up loving horror films. And it was great to see him kind of excel at that as opposed to kind of like recoil from it, right? I think a lot of directors at his level would have shied away from horror. So.
He was so excited to make this,
right.
Especially after hearing some of the interviews and stuff. I love that he told a story about how when he was a camp counselor back when he was a teen, to get his bunk of boys to behave and go to bed so he could like sneak over and see his girlfriend, who was like the girl counselor in the sister girl camp. He would read them Dracula at night. Yep. So he had this connection since he was young and this like love and appreciation for the book. And then to have this when it fell in his lap, when Winona brought it to him and was like, it's a TV script, but how about it's a film script? And how about you do it? He was so excited to like make this and make it as big and lush as it ended up being.
Yeah.
Like fully realized the dream of what this could be.
Yeah, and he talks about also growing up, because he is that right generation for the Monster Kid crowd.
Yes, exactly.
Like John Landis and Mick Garris and all those guys who all grew up around the same time when Famous Monsters was very popular magazine, a new magazine, and when a lot of the Universal classics were being resurgenced in the theater. So he did see Dracula and loved it as a kid.
Exactly.
He talks about it being very precious to him, something that he thought was just for him, which I love to see that he had that.
You and I think the same way about so much of what we love because it hits us right here, like this film does, like we'll talk about, obviously. But I feel that way about this movie, like it's just for me. That's how I've treated it since I was 14 years old. I saw it in the theater. My dad took me because I was not legally allowed to go by myself since it was rated R.
Yeah, I was 15, but I didn't get to see it in the theater. I had to wait till it was on cable. So I didn't see it till I was 16. But yeah. So to think of like young Francis Ford Coppola, like preteen Francis Ford, going to the theater and seeing Bela Lugosi and saying, ooh, this is amazing. I love this. And then reading the book when he got a little older as a teenager. Right. And it becoming all part of who he was and kind of carrying that with him until he had the opportunity to really dive in. And then he does talk about the fact that he'd seen so many of the different versions of Dracula. Because we know that there is a plethora. I was thinking of compiling a list and it's really,
I was going to ask you.
Yeah. Because I was thinking about it because you and I had talked about it a little bit and it's like, there's so many.
Yeah, did I even ask you roughly? I go, do you know the rough estimate of how many Draculas there were before this? And you were...
It's dozens.
I don't even know. Yeah, if we could even count, there were like probably 4 things we might be missing.
Right, so that's the thing. And I know he was influenced by, as a young Italian American, he was influenced by the works of Italian filmmakers like Mario Bava.
Right.
He would have also been seeing the Hammer horror films out of England. There's, of course, the screenwriter in one of the extras, the screenwriter of the film talks about growing up on the Hammer films, but also all of those second, third, fourth rung kind of sequels to the Universal brand. Right. Going all the way up to there's Billy Kid Meets Dracula.
Right.
And,
they had Dracula meeting everybody. I was an Abbott and Costello fan of that because my dad was. Yeah. So we loved Abbott and Costello. So then when you'd throw like a monster in, we were extra excited. We're like, oh, and a monster. And these two guys we love.
Those are fun. I highly recommend those. If you,
I forgot about the Billy the Kid thing.
Yeah, there's a Billy the Kid. I think there's like Dracula's daughter. There's like a Dracula's dog out there somewhere that I totally remember being on a list that I don't think I ever saw.
Wow.
There's hundreds, I'm assuming at this point, Dracula incarnations. Even I believe Santos The Mexican wrestler, superhero movies. He goes against Dracula at some point, I believe.
There was a way to throw Dracula in almost everything, and it was almost like, do you need a bad guy? Just use Dracula. He's here for you.
And everybody knows
get to put him in. Exactly.
Yeah. And you don't have, it does so much shorthand. Yeah.
Yeah, no pun intended, or maybe a little pun intended.
Right.
Known
so
as like an excellent villain you could toss into any situation if you so choose.
And I mean, it's impossible to not think of the, I believe, 1931 Universal Classic starring Bela Lugosi. Of course, there's, and I may one day do a little bit of a breakdown, because there's also the Spanish language version, which was produced at the same time at night on the same sets with slightly different costuming, even though they say same costuming, because when you watch it, there are subtle differences.
Right.
They're both beautiful interpretations. The version, though, the two versions that Coppola cites as being the most influential to him is the original Nosferatu, the silent film by Renaud. And you can totally see that in his shadow play.
And I was just going to say, it's all there in the shadows, for sure. It's
There's so many nods to it and within it when you watch it with that as a mindset. And also, he said him and his brother grew up watching David Carradine films where he was Dracula.
Yes, and he said that was his scariest Dracula to him was Carradine.
Yes.
That's the one that frightened him the most.
And actually, in many ways, we think of Lugosi as the stereotype of who Dracula is, but Carradine actually is the one who did a lot of those, a lot of that look that becomes classic. Because if no other reason, by the time we come around as kids and are watching Dracula and all that, the license had run out on Lugosi's family.
Right.
So I know that there's really no merch that has Lugosi's image, so it looks more like Carradine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure that's the only reason why that's the kind of traditional way we know it, but I know that became kind of the standard. And Carradine played him in some of the sequels, like Dracula. There's so many to name, and I know I watched them all recently because we got the box set, but there's a lot.
That's awesome, which is something I would love to do. Like last Halloween, Ed and I, my husband, for those who don't know, we're like, let's go through the Hammer stuff and just start picking things and be like, watch a couple of, Christopher Lee, and then watch a couple of like Frank Langella. Like, because there were so much, we're like, let's just pick a bunch. And then when we're done those, get some more. And it was like a never ending fountain of Dracula movies.
The very first Dracula in the Hammer cycle. Oh, I love that one because Christopher Lee is a great Dracula, but to me, Peter Cushing is my favorite Van Helsing.
Yeah,
he is so cool at Van Helsing. But there's so many to choose from. You can see how all of them are kind of folded into this idea within this context of Bram Stoker's. The other thing I'd like to kind of put into what's kind of an important context going into this movie is Coppola first off said he was so in love with the book, he realized all of these versions he had seen don't stick to the book at all.
Exactly.
And that's important to him, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he really wanted to, as much as he loved them, he wanted to be like, let's just take this story and we'll show it this way, where we even have the journals intercut and the negative, and it's shown through the film as how important it was for the story to unfold like that, and that everybody is recording this and it's all their different points of view. There was a way to do that book into the film, like he finally realized it could happen.
He also points out how so many versions truncate the characters themselves and kind of collapse them into each other, and some characters are totally even thrown away. And so that's important to him, that he was able to recreate the book in a way that hadn't been done.
Right. With James Hart's love story, that was so important for him, was to have it go by the book, but then to make a love story out of it. Right. And James even had said that within the myth, within the reality of who Vlad Tepes was, and then the folklore that gets like folded in with him from the area, there's also a love story of a wife or a lover who threw herself out of a castle into the river. There's a princess river or river princess mention in that area after she got tricked with fake news of his death from the Turks. Right. So he had heard that, and I think it was just like, all right, perfect. This is we're going to make it a love story too, to go along with the actuality of like how the story unfolds in the book.
And I think that's something that they had in common, Coppola and Hart. Hart being the screenwriter. They both had done that research long before becoming part of this project, I think, of who was Dracula based on. Yeah. So they both came to it with the knowledge of who Vlad Tepes was, and the idea of Vlad the Impaler as a person who really existed in history. And I think that's probably the single most important thing about this film.
It is.
It's the first time you see not just an accurate recreation of the book, but the melding with actual history. And every incarnation of Dracula since has definitely taken from that.
100%. That was something that I wanted to bring up too.
Yeah.
Even if we talk about it a little later, how some people kind of brush off this movie or pick it apart for certain reasons, the influence of Bram Stoker's Dracula is totally undeniable on every damn vampire or Dracula-related movie that came after, almost to the point of like, they want to kind of try and keep the font, and they want to kind of try and use a similar-ish score and a similar-ish look. But every time you watch one of those, you're just like, it's a TV dinner. It provides nothing for me.
Right.
Empty calories. I don't want it.
If you, some of you may have seen in my short reviews that I've been doing, I reviewed Dracula Untold. I
watched that because I didn't see the movie because I'm such a snot that I will now dismiss everything, almost pretty much everything Dracula related, but I did like the Jonathan Rhys-Meyers TV show.
I was going to say,
even though
the TV incarnations I liked,
and 3 other people liked it, and that's why it was canceled. I don't think anyone watched it. But I will totally dismiss everything like a Bram Stoker's Dracula super fan snot and be like, why do I need this? I have this.
But and that was
movie,
right.
But I watched you. I wanted to see you do it because I was like, oh, Vic, tell me about it, because I of course thought that one was going to be garbage and just be like, nah.
I mean, it wasn't awful, right. I mean, what it did, but it totally takes this. It is the life of Vlad Tepes,
right,
before he is really Dracula. And
you're saying it was more of like a war movie.
Yeah, it was. It's definitely more influenced, I think, by fantasy films.
Fantasy, like that's what you're saying, like a
Lord of the
fantasy
Rings
battle.
kind of thing.
You felt like it had that like,
Game of Thrones
do you love Game of Thrones?
Yes.
Check this out.
So, and I think that movie would not have been possible in any way without this first happening, because we would not have known this story.
Yes, ma'am.
And not that not everyone knew of Vlad, but it's this idea that we wouldn't have known that a movie was possible that could have just focused on that part of his life.
Exactly.
And so it's not the only one. It's just the most recent that I've watched that's in my head that I know that it has stolen from that.
Yeah.
I think even the version, hardcore Buffy fans will probably get at me for this, but I could even say that the version of Dracula that you meet in Buffy the Vampire Slayer is influenced by Bram Stoker's Dracula.
It's gotta be.
Because of this kind of, again, a vague historical context that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
Or it didn't exist cinematically, I guess is the way I want to say it.
Yeah, true. Exactly.
So, and I think one of the things we can also talk about early on in this is the visual style. And that's probably like the thing that comes to mind instantly with this movie for me. What about you, Alison?
1,000,000%. And now that we, from watching it and then from researching as much as we had, because once you love something, you're like, what can I get? I can find a book. Let me find this book. What does it tell me? It tells me how they made it. Oh my gosh, great. What can I find? It hit me so hard about how gorgeous and full it was. I feel like nothing I had seen before. And I'd watched a lot of, obviously, I'd been 14, so I'd watched a lot of movies by then. I was a fan of a lot of things by then. You see, same as you, 3 of them behind me that are from childhood, right? But there was just something about the beauty of it and the realness of it. And then when you come to find that all of the special effects were practical in camera and pretty much designed to be like any effects that any filmmaker in the actual 1890s would make. All the effects that they would use to create, like a magician would use to create his effects, which kind of turns into how filmmaking started with special effects in that way, with mirrors, with the in-camera stuff, with doing like live action screenshots and layering things behind them. That feel of it is what hits you before you even know that's what they're doing. Right. And then when you find out how this was made and how much time and energy it came, and it wasn't everyone in front of a green screen go, pretend there's a guy here. It's like, no, we're going to project him in the background so you can actually act to it and see it, and we're layering this like a cake. I use a food reference. It's a delicious chocolate cake.
Yes, this is a decadent red velvet chocolate cake.
Which makes sense because there's decadence in Vlad's life and his life as Dracula. There's decadence in the Victorian high-end lifestyle that Lucy and her family, lead, that Mina's brought into, and as Mina and Jonathan are simpler people on a different economic scale, social scale, but her best friend is a rich girl in this gorgeous surroundings that she gets to stay in while Jonathan goes on his trip. So that's the Victorian excess that I love so much is in there beautifully. Yep. And the attention to detail with everything they make is part of why it's so gorgeous. And then when you learn of what exactly they did to make it, makes it even bigger because you don't know how they're doing those shots and what how they've created that one scene you just saw. You just know it affected you personally because it's so beautiful. And then when you find out it has another layer of like, oh, this is even more magical because I know all the time and effort and love and energy it took to make this.
Yeah. They do talk even in one of the extras specifically just about the effects, the practical effects in the film.
Love it.
They talk about how this may be one of the last films. It may be the last film to use many of these techniques because you have there's front projection, rear projection. Yeah. There's glass mats. There's using boxes, light box to kind of cordon off screens so that you can reverse the film and shoot again.
Yeah.
All techniques you learn about in the world of, say, 16 millimeter filmmaking, not in big, huge 35 millimeter massive productions.
No, and I think this is the last of the huge productions, like you said. Like they were even saying when they talk about the Borgo Pass shot, and that how everything was shot on sound stages. That's the other part that people need to realize who've never seen this, or if you've seen it but never went beyond just watching the movie. The only time they were outside was on a backlot in Sony to do the walking around London scene,
which is amazing.
Which is still a lot that they decorated, but every single moment was in a sound stage. A Borgo Pass multiple horse chase with action and gun shooting and fighting was shot on a soundstage.
And that is such a work of the past in that.
Yes. Like they were talking about how back when they used to do those shoot those scenes, you just have grips running past the camera with branches.
Yes, the old school way,
going about the old school way, or to make a train car shake like it's moving and you have somebody passing by, which is like the magic and the reason why I think you and I love filmmaking anyway. Yeah. And what's inspiring to us is when you find out how those things are made and how they do it, it's even cooler.
Yeah.
It makes it more magical. It doesn't take anything away. You're like, oh, how cool. That's how they did it. The creativity that it takes.
Even in the intro in the film that gives the kind of the setup of who Vlad is, the fight scenes, they decided after shooting some things that it wasn't working. So they did puppetry.
The puppets are gorgeous.
Backlit puppets. And it was just the flat black and it's so simplistic, but it tells the story in such a way that you make you feel you're watching history.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
In twofold, because this is something that would have been perceived maybe by people telling that story then would have been through puppets.
Exactly.
Would have been a doable format. And then to think that, yes, in 1890s, you could see like a George Méliès making a war film in the way that he made like Trip to the Moon, Voyage to the Moon, and how he would have used puppets or wire tricks. They talk about wire tricks.
Yes.
They talk about removing mirrors to have open panes so that someone can double on either side, you know.
I feel so silly that I didn't know that was like a traditional filmmaking trick. I
knew
didn't
there was a
know
trick.
that the
I didn't know they
mirror
used
trick.
it here.
I know. I didn't know that the mirror trick was it's not a mirror. They just have a double, and the guy,
Yep.
the actor is on this side as the mirror, and his double is just the back.
I think most horror fans know that from Evil Dead 2, though. I think that's when we all learned it was fake.
Yeah.
How did he reach in? You know,
Right.
But it's amazing to see that they were given that kind of play in a time, and I think this also is important in because this is '92 we're talking about, right?
Yes.
So a few years later, the world changed. Better, worse. I'm not going to judge, but especially when Lucas made the prequels, it became standard operating procedure to do green screens, to do digital backgrounds, and to do
green
everything.
Screen was still so newish.
Yeah.
And I know this can go into the story of how the original creative team was trying to pitch him all the stuff that he still didn't want. Because he came with the idea of, I want it to look like we're filmmakers during that time using all the tricks that they use. Because that's how everyone made their films up until now. It's going to have the feel of the time period. It's going to make it more special. And they weren't quite listening to him. So he got rid of them and brought in his like 20-something-year-old son, Roman. And Roman was the B unit doing the special effects, and him and his team created all of these amazing things for us that are all in the film.
An amazing opportunity that is
Can you imagine,
only possible maybe when your dad is Francis Ford Coppola.
I inserted myself in there. I thought of you. I was like, if either of us had this chance.
Oh God. Yeah. and
blows my
mind. Know that Francis Ford Coppola kicking out a visual effects team was a wonderful image in my head.
Yeah. A big name one. I know he didn't say who the people were. I don't know if I would have known them, but he would reference, he's like, this was a big name with the studio. And he was like, no, we're done. All right. So my kid's going to come in and do it.
Right. And then in Columbia Pictures, they're like, all right, Francis. Yeah. But I mean,
great. Yeah.
And also to think in time frame, this is right around the time, right before we see Jurassic Park.
Yes.
Right. And it's right before Terminator 2.
Mm-hmm.
The two films that made CG a reality.
Right.
So
and that impressed us with CG.
Right. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, that was probably a very hard fight at a time when people were getting ready to do this. And he was like, no, I want to do this. You know?
Exactly.
Another thing that is impeccably important to this film, when you say style, is fashion and costuming. There's a very unique approach.
Yeah. So I love Eiko Ishioka. She was, and R.I.P. to her, she's no longer with us, like an amazing creative artistic director, and then she also did fashion, stage stuff, and then into film. And I know he had seen her, he had known her work from a previous movie.
She did a poster art for Japan. For Apocalypse Now. He was very impressed.
Yeah. And so he went to her. I love the line that they kept saying was, the costumes are the sets. That was such a huge thing for Francis. And when he explained it to Eiko, she was the type of artist who totally understood what he mean. We all know that the set design, and we all know that the costuming is such a big part of each character in every film, right? Everything is thought out. They say there are no mistakes in a movie, like everything is on purpose.
Yep, everything on frame, that's mise en scène.
Right, exactly, yeah. But it was such a bigger deal that the costumes were going to tell the story along with the characters. Like if we start from the beginning and we talk about how Vlad comes in with his wolf armor, that all just looks like muscle. And that's supposed to be like the it's all red metal, like a skinned wolf. So it's like the musculature and power, like pure raw power of him as the wolf of Christendom is what Vlad was known as. He was fighting for Jesus, and look where that got him. Anyway.
Yep.
There's a story.
It's what it is.
When we see, we see Jonathan and Mina are very like buttoned up and closed up. But as Mina starts to know Vlad as he comes into her life, her look starts to change. She's in a bit more like open clothes. There's more showing. There's brighter colors. There's darker colors to her. And then we talk about like Dracula as an older man who's like extremely eccentric looking. I love him as like, we talk, he's always like the aristocratic count as we've come to know him. But now he's like this way over the top eccentric.
Yep.
Old count who's like, here's my wild hairstyle that's kind of has like maybe an Asian influence, and I've got these gorgeous red robes with like my gold dragons on them, and I've got clothes from places of the world that I've been, or
right,
various cultures that have influenced me, or maybe that I've taken from because of my job as like a soldier of God, where I've incorporated my whole life into my look, so it's not just like, oh, little suit, little tuxedo.
But it also, even in like 1890 period, it harkens back to a much more ancient time.
Yeah,
within those particularly in those sequences in the decrepit castle, he has the look of a man who's lived there for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
which is important.
Yeah,
but even more so than most period films, I think that the fact that you have to represent periods within this one character, even.
Yeah, because of how, right, exactly, to remind everyone how long he's been around.
Right, definitely.
I've seen so much. I've done so many things.
Right,
he's been around all the blocks.
Right. But then when he comes to London and he's the kind of sophisticated younger man, who is just the gray on gray ensemble. You can't not think of that when you think of him.
With the blue glasses that like pop his blue eyes out perfectly.
Yep. And
like
the
intense,
long curls.
gorgeous blue eyes. Yeah.
Yep. It's
lovely
perfect.
Pantene hair. Yeah.
Yes. But you contrast his kind of worldliness with, like you said, like with Mina. I believe in the documentary, she refers to Mina's look as kind of almost the picture of virginity.
Yes, exactly.
She's so covered. Restrained.
It's only like you just see this because she's got a glove, she's got the hat, which is the style at the time. The next to here, and everything's covered.
And it's layered dresses, and she's so literally buttoned up that she has no ability to breathe as a person, right? Yeah. And that's her personality at that time,
right?
And then
until she gets to spend more time with him and she gets put into that red dress that I still want a reproduction of, just saying. Hair down.
Yep.
It's open.
It's awesome that to see her transformed in that way visually. Yeah. To kind of like reassure the audience. No, she's a different woman than she was when you met her.
Yeah,
right?
Look at her. Yeah.
Yep.
She's able to breathe.
Now she can breathe, right? Now she can have her own thoughts.
Yeah.
But I love you contrast her with Lucy. And Lucy for the time period is just a complete radical.
Scandalous with the shoulders showing.
Oh yeah.
The first time we meet Lucy, she's got a dress with the shoulders showing, which has to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's even a line that because they're looking at that erotic novel, which is kind of like a fun you and your girlfriend's moment. I think we've all had that in some capacity, because it's cool to see their friendship's real. There isn't anything about Lucy with her money and her wealth that she ever looks down on Mina and treats her differently. And then there's a line that Jonathan says that it's a defect of the aristocracy that they say and do as they please.
Right.
So he's kind of like, oh, God, your rich friend, in her excess. And I think that's also part of it. She can get away with being wild, with the snake dress at her party that again shows like a lot of her like upper body, which is a big deal, and say what she wants with her double entendre and flirting with the boys because they can.
Even if like she starts out as a sexual being.
Yeah.
And then when she's affected by Dracula, she even becomes less inhibited than she was before.
Oh yeah, she becomes an animal.
Oh, the long flowingness. I love the imagery of her in that kind of half dream, half waking state, going to him.
She's walking through the cemetery in that red Which is, I think, like the coolest nightgown I've ever seen. And I was like,
that's
like
totally not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was like, whoa.
That's like a club outfit. That's not a nightgown.
I was like, oh, I'd wear that
that
to the club. That awesome red outfit again. It's like red. It's got
bodice
lines.
almost,
It looks
but
like
in almost an openness.
Right. It's flowing blood. It looks like the inside of a body. Yes. And that's when she's kind of being hypnotized by him, and she has her first encounter with the wolf back in the cemetery. Yeah. Flowing, gorgeous red hair. And then going into her wedding outfit, which Aiko specifically designed after that Australian lizard with like the neck fan. Yeah. She, besides it being like, we're going to do like an extravagant over the top Victorian, like what would be like the most extravagant Victorian wedding dress we could find with all different fabrics. Cause it's like, they're going to have the money and they're going to want to be bombastic with the look because of the type of people they are and what she's like. I've given her this huge collar because I'm bringing in her animal side's coming out even more now that she's slowly turning into a vampire.
A lot of her outfits are based on animals. There's a lot of things that are taken from reptiles, and it's just kind of her animalistic nature, but it also there was something that they didn't end up using, was that she was supposed to be, she'd have the ability to almost writhe on the floor like a snake.
She wasn't able to move in that dress that way.
Yes. and Coppola says sometimes you just had to go with it. Like, he can't at the 11th hour decide to change the costume. So
it's like the dress won't let me crawl on the ground, so we got to figure out something else.
The dress that was based on me crawling on the ground doesn't let me crawl on the ground.
No. Well, I remember some of the scenes I'd seen when Gary's trying to fight with his red armor and the pieces kept popping off.
Yes, he's just like handing it to people. Yeah,
and he's like, oh, my leg, what do I do? And he was saying it was tough to work in that. It worked.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's not quite as the Dietz kind of,
this is my art and it is dangerous.
Yes, but it is restricting. Art at times can be restricting, even though when it's showing that you're not a restricted person.
As someone who loves to overdress, I can really empathize and sympathize with them, because I put myself, not today, but I'm known to put myself in clothes that are restricting or maybe inhibit me in some way, but I really love the way they look. So I sometimes don't, not so much now pandemic style where I'm in my gym jams all the time, but a lot of times, we used to go out all the time, girl. I'd be in some kind of getup to be like, yeah, I think we're all right. Or, I can usually maneuver and breathe, but
wasn't so much dancing on the dance floor.
Try to get out as much as I could. The corsets were mostly for like a show, because I know if I'd wore a lot of that stuff to the club, it'd be like painful.
Yeah, definitely. But such is fashion, and I think it's safe to say it's another reason why this film is so memorable and successful is because how impeccable the fashion is for it, telling the story.
I think even if you haven't watched the movie, you probably have seen images of, especially either Lucy's bride dress with the collar, which maybe if you're a little bit younger, you're like, she looks like that Jurassic Park lizard with the thing. Or I know at least everyone's seen a picture of Gary Oldman as old Dracula with the buns, like the crazy buns and the like huge long fingers.
It's even been a Simpsons joke, so I think everyone knows it that way. Even.
I was just going to say.
Yeah.
With lasting influence, the fact that it made it on The Simpsons was like a big deal.
And all cultural icons make it to The Simpsons, right?
Yeah, that's how you know. That's how you know you went somewhere and you hit something, is when you get referenced on The Simpsons.
I think there's as much as this film becomes a series of images that we culturally now know as pop, part of pop culture spectrum. Right. It's wonderful to see, watching it again this time, I noticed how many references there were to previous films and other pop culture moments in through the ages, kind of, because it's such it deals with time, it deals with worldliness, it deals with kind of these kind of romanticized images of horror. There's wonderful ways that they pay tribute throughout this film, right? And some of the costumes I think help that as well. There's a moment when we, maybe not when we first meet Van Helsing, but when Van Helsing comes to Lucy's house when he's asked to come there to inspect Lucy to find out what is the strange thing that's happening to her. When he first arrives in his jacket, his very like over the top jacket and his suitcase.
I loved, and I know this was a deliberate thing, that they wanted Coppola wanted Van Helsing to be also eccentric.
Yes,
and
definitely.
I love having him added in there too, because if your rival's going to be Dracula, you have to be the type of person that would have a rival like that, or even match him on the level of like, I'm also a little out there.
Right.
And maybe I've got a little supernatural in me going on too. Just
and he's
to
a little crazy
match
too.
each other. I love that about his character.
Yes.
And that Coppola told him a few times, make it a little nuts. And at first Hopkins wasn't sure, but then he'd like throw in a thing. When he spins Mina around, dances with her and sniffs her, which is funny because it makes you think of Lecter. Because that's one of Hannibal's main traits is his sense of smell, and he could smell anything on anyone. So that, because when he sniffed in the air for Clarice with her perfume, and that made me like when he sniffs Mina, and he's like, "You're one of the lights. There's dark and light in the world, and you're one of the lights." And he's like, "Yeah, just smelling the good in you. Okay, you can go."
And then he also talked.
Moment.
Hopkins even talks about his choice to do that is that maybe he would have known from that she'd been around Dracula,
right,
and that he had a little bit of his aura. I love that. I love that bizarre eccentricity that he's just as off as Dracula in some ways.
Yes.
But I do love that moment. To me, was such a reference to The Exorcist. That arrival scene. He drops the bag next to him. He looks up into the light with a kind of sideways corner. It's a wonderful reference to an important kind of adversary to the villain.
Exactly.
And everything that Hopkins does from that point on just proves that he is that little eccentric, that little crazy that you need to combat crazy and to combat supernatural. And I love when he's explaining to the men in the room after they take the blood and he instantly notices the bite marks on Lucy. Goes for transfusion. And then afterwards, after he's trained the men to fix Lucy up a bit,
when they're outside talking,
talking about what the supernatural is and how you have to kind of, think outside the box in his own way. And he vanishes and shows up,
he shows up smoking his cigar. He's like, so, like I said.
Yeah, you never know.
Y'all got to be a little nuts for this.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think Coppola, like you said, Coppola told him, go for it. Be crazy, be out there, be eccentric. And it's amazing when you watch things now and knowing that many films don't get this anymore, but they had weeks, I think maybe a month even.
They were in
time together.
Yes, they were in camp together. Camp Coppola. Yep. He's got the whole crew with him in the cast.
Napa Valley, I believe.
And his Napa, where they have their Napa venue, place. Yeah. I would do anything to go to Camp Coppola and just to have watched them. He had them all read Dracula together.
Like a table read of the entire book, which is amazing.
I love that.
Get them all in the right mindset.
Yeah, part of their bonding experience.
Yes.
That's the other part of it, just as like interest in filmmaking is it's so important for your cast. I know eventually you will bond and hopefully you will. Sometimes people don't and there's issues.
But sometimes that works too.
Yeah. And true. But to have the foresight to be like, well, this is how I like to make my movies. And for something like this, we're all going to come together, spend our time. I know Tom Waits used to get on the piano and sing songs to them.
Which is amazing.
It's like dream world. Yeah. If we could have had a moment just to experience a day there.
Well, just think like the primary cast. So like a dozen people, right? Yep. With Coppola and I believe the screenwriter and the cinematographer at times.
Yeah.
Doing improv. Just getting to know their characters. Exactly. They had them improv scenes just based on what their character, just like you would do like a comedy improv class. He would do those types of practices with them where he'd be like, how would Lucy and her suitors act in this moment? And just go. And they would just be their characters in that time, or doing like exercises together.
He would have the guys who were the main hunters and with Reeves and Elways, they would go on horseback riding trips together, or Amazing. They would do their own little separate bonding moments. So they would have their time bonding as we're going to be this group of men who are going to work together as a team to help Mina and defeat Dracula. We have to put an end to this. So you had like outside of the film bonding time, so that was already there when it was time to shoot and work together as their, as actors.
Which opened it up for the invitation essentially from Coppola that the script is what it is, but it's not in stone.
Yeah.
And this is something I always love in filmmaking, is when you let everyone be a contributor.
He let them, yes.
And say, if there's something missing, tell me. If there's something you feel your character would have done that's not there, make it happen. And he put it on all of them that it was their responsibility. And that's how you end up with Anthony Hopkins deciding, I want to have a moment with Mina when I first meet her. And that's why that happened. And to think, we would have missed some of those moments if Coppola had been strict about the script. And it's not how filmmaking should work all the time.
No.
I think it needs this.
He described, and this is the most interesting way I've heard it described. I've taken some classes. I know not as much as you, but I had a desire once to make a film or two. But he described filmmaking as picking mushrooms, and you're just collecting. And some day you get some good, some days you don't get enough, but you're collecting all the components and organizing it so it can be like the best delicious dish you could make, that kind of thing. And to have everybody, to notice there's all the pieces that are there together and how important the important part they all play.
Yeah. He says that shooting isn't making the movie. Shooting is just making one of the parts of the movie.
Yeah.
And that's just one element, and then that everything else has to come together. He created, for many of his films, and I know for this one he spoke intently about how they had 6 different versions of a pre-book before the script.
Yeah.
Like storyboards, but not just storyboards, concept books, where art that would associate with different characters, with different scenes. And he called it the score. And it was this huge binder.
Right.
It was amazing to think that you had this huge resource. So all the people who were working on the film had this massive Bible of the story that you would usually get for a TV show, and he treated it the same.
When they would have those like animatics, if that's correct, with the voiceover artist who was the narrator of just the storyboard. So you had a version of it like that. So you would watch the storyboard, and as it went through, and listen to how the narrators, with some sound effects added in, so you get like the full impact of how we're going to shoot this and present this, and how you're going to want to act into this. That's amazing.
And then Hopkins
just to have the piece to work on.
Yeah.
It's just that's just one of the tools, like you said.
And then to know that when he had them all in that kind of Camp Coppola, he would give them reading lists. He would give them film screenings of movies that influenced him, and it's just what an amazing atmosphere of creating art. And that's something about this film, and I think some people would probably maybe discredit in some ways, that this is in many ways an art film.
It 100% is. They even say it's based on the symbolist painters of the time, like Klimt, and which is even reflected in when older Vlad has that really gorgeous gilded like dressing gown he's wearing. It looks like it's just like a live action Klimt painting.
Yes.
Which he referenced the kiss to Aiko, and she's like, "Oh, I get it. Okay, he's like, can you make this into an outfit?" And she's like, "Sure."
The white and gold outfit when he pops out of the coffin.
Yeah.
That is that painting.
Yes, exactly.
So it's something about a worldly artist who's making a film, who's going to take all of the mediums that he's taken in his life, movies, books, art, anything that has influenced him is important, and he's going to express that through the filmmakers so that we can all do it together. And that's wonderful, and that's film. That's what film does in art,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to get too like old farty stodgy, but I feel like there's a lot of that's missing. Yeah. Even in stuff that I totally enjoy and love, and I'm like, this is great. It's that whatever's new come out, it's a great thing. Watching this for the how many millionth times. The first time I watched, I actually didn't watch the film straight through itself. The last watching of this film I did was with the commentary.
Which I haven't heard.
I had the commentary. So. I did that. I hadn't done it before. And it made me have a moment, and maybe right now is a lot of time of reflection anyway, where I was like, I miss so much of how movies like this used to be made and how special they are. And that there's so much that I've come to know and love and be a fan of and have a great time with. But it is all mostly in front of a green screen. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, people don't appreciate how important and special it is, and the craft. Mm-hmm. To take the time. I think why Lord of the Rings was so special, honestly.
Oh, and
it was because it was like people built a world of crafters and artists to be like, this is how you make a film. And that's how films were made. Yep. Good or bad or ugly, you all had bigger versions of those components.
Mm-hmm. I think, and I've said this to my students even, you can learn more about what real filmmaking is from watching the plethora of extras in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit film box sets, because it shows you the way film used to be made. And the studio's making just concept art for days to help them decide what they're going to make later.
Yeah.
It's something that was afforded to Peter Jackson because he was in New Zealand. And it's the fact that we see it here in Stoker's Dracula is because Francis Ford Coppola was already Francis Ford Coppola.
Exactly.
Right? Only like him and like Martin Scorsese, you could see getting that kind of time
the clout
production.
To be right, which is, and again, such a big deal with this film, which is so important and even mind-blowing in a way. It's for something that can be so odd and surreal and dreamlike, come from a big studio, big budget, like regular Hollywood.
And that's unheard of now, right? Like
totally unheard of.
You hear actors talking today and it's like, oh my God, I would have loved just a week to get to know the people I was with or to rehearse. No one rehearses.
Different. No one rehearses. No one wants you to try any different. Don't have a different idea. Don't get crazy. We're going to do it like this. Then after we do it like this, 5 years later, we're going to do it like that again and call it this again is now part this, that 3, was 4, that 5. Thing, part, whatever.
Yeah. Not to say that sequels are awful. We're just saying that we miss this kind of attention to detail.
Get them in front of a trilogy that we know and love so much,
which was known because it was cutting edge. And
exactly,
Star Wars, in its own little way, was one of the points that they were given the opportunity to make what became CG later.
Oh yeah, exactly.
In its own way, and it's hard to think of that as computer graphics now, but it was when computer graphics meant a computer that took up a room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole room was the computer.
Right. Yeah. But all this to say is that it's impeccable, and it's one of the reasons why this film is so important and why it's an important horror classic, a modern horror classic.
Yeah.
I mean, you have. Yes, it changed Dracula forever because it instilled a sense of history that wasn't allowed to be there, and it had the full book in a way that had never been there. Yep. Very important. Tells the full story, right? Mm-hmm. It's the caliber and the cast and the crew. We didn't even go through. We can go through really quickly now.
Oh, we will.
It's amazing when you think of the talent that was allowed to work on a project.
Because I love this cast so
it's
much.
Amazing.
Go ahead with your thing, and then we'll get back to it.
Yeah, right. But I mean, it's huge in 1990. Like, these are everybody you'd want. If you could hand pick, this is who you want on your crew.
It's a dream cast.
Yes. So you have that. You have, like we said, the amazing sense of style, the artistic ability and flair that this film has is above and beyond, even for Coppola's previous films. Mm-hmm. And the use of practical effects. Those 4 things to me are key of why, for so many people to think that this is just a big budget, romantic, gothic, erotic, whatever, but without using the H word, right? It's not a horror film, but it's all these others. All of that censored. To say, that's what makes this a modern horror classic. It made all of these things. It upped the game. It upped the ante, right?
And you can see it in the ones that came after that are kind of throwing in little messy pieces that don't work so well. Van Helsing.
And when 95% of your effects are done, by a guy in a computer lab, 2 days later, you lose some of that emotional content.
Yeah, you can have the same font, but it's not the same movie, so step off.
And for every movie after Dracula that used this score, every movie that used the score in their trailer after this.
Okay.
A million.
I wanted to ask you about that. I honestly didn't research this, and I wanted to ask you, why the hell were they allowed to use this music in other movies? Because I remember hearing it and feeling like almost like, what? I go, that's not for you. That doesn't belong there. And I would be like offended as a fan.
I mean,
how is that possible? Do you know the like technicality of it?
The two things I'm going to say are the main reason why we know that happened. First reason is it's property of Columbia Pictures.
Oh.
Right? So Columbia Pictures can say, hey, remember that really good score that we paid a lot of money for? Let's use it again.
I had no idea.
Also, you have to think of the fact that while we associate it with a lot of movies after this movie, it's in their trailer. It's not in the film.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where Columbia can say, well, what do we have in our archives that we can dig out that people will automatically associate?
Or they can shoot something at the trailer because that's got to go out.
Right.
Or like you said, it's got the personal recognition of
it's a product that they have that was good. So I think it was possible. It was easy grab for them, and it's a one less expense is to say, well, let's recycle that. It's not the only film that I know that happened to, but oh my God, was it used in every horror movie?
It drove me up a goddamn wall because I was like, how dare you? That's not yours.
I mean,
like, this belongs to Bram Stoker's Dracula.
As somebody wearing a Goblin shirt right now, I think most people know me as like not just a horror junkie, but a film score junkie.
Indeed.
And this was one of my most prized CDs when it came out. I listened to this so much. This was the soundtrack to every book I read for so long.
This is a big floppy. It's been opened many times.
Yes. Oh, mine's off the hinges.
Oops.
I did that for a lot of things that I went off the hinges. But
I would listen to this
all the time.
A lot. I had a little moment in one of my creative writing classes in high school where we had to write a story to a piece of music. So I took The Storm from here.
A beautiful piece.
Yes, I wrote a short story about an otherworldly storm. Okay, maybe I wasn't being as original. Look, I didn't become a writer.
Hey,
and I wrote it.
It was an exercise.
Yeah, and I wrote it to the song. And then I remember calling a friend on the phone and saying, can I read you the story? I read her the story as I played the song. Yes. Of course. She was like, oh, this is great. She loved it. And I felt like I was genius.
I can... I mean, I think I did this when we did the Halloween episode, but I can show how long I've had this. If you guys can see there.
The wall.
Anything you put the sticker on, if it broke, they would replace it. So
my 9 Inch Nails Broken has a wall sticker on it.
A lot of my CDs from that time period have that because it was conveniently down the street from where I went to community college.
Oh, you were nice. I think the wall was at my Echelon Mall, and that was the only one. So it depended on which. The Sam Goodies were placed out more.
Yeah, we had
until I started going to Tunes, which was like the cooler CD place. But it was mostly Sam Goody, but the wall was at one. So sometimes when I would get in there, sticker.
It was in a nearby strip mall, so I definitely went there in between classes to pick up score music a lot. But I will say, it's even stamped on the back property of Columbia Pictures.
I never even thought that would be the reason why. It didn't cross my mind. I just remember feeling very frustrated and, I had a fan outrage about it. I was like, how are they allowed? That seems wrong.
It happens to me a lot. And it's not the only one. I know that another film.
I'll notice.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned The Crow. The Crow soundtrack does pop up in other trailers. Yeah. Not just for the sequels, but other trailers as well in that time period. There's certain scores that are just, I guess they weren't cheap to produce, and they were getting their money's worth.
Right, and this one is gorgeous and big and lush and gorgeous, just like the film. Like, if I could think of a score that fits blended so perfectly, this is up there of one of the best for sure.
I will say that in that time period, there was this, like I've said, The Crow, but also more Interview with a Vampire was another score that I listened to on repeat and skipped the songs, though. But
this one we don't skip because the Annie Lennox song is so sweet.
That's true.
But this is Song for a Vampire.
Both of them are very lush in a period where we were very stripped down in music for films. So that was breaking with tradition, and it's beautiful and well worth it.
For you young kids out there that don't want to play a compact disc,
yes,
I'm pretty sure it's streaming.
I'm pretty sure you can
I must have gone and looked for it at one. Yeah. Oh, I know. Actually, I know that it is because I was designing a playlist for the for Halloween at work when we had to decorate our printer rooms, and the one concept was a masked Gothic ball, and I love Lucy's Party, that like sweet little begins with it begins with the harpsichord, and it's like that sweet little piano that kind of gets a little dizzying at the end. That's always like I stick that on like all these like if I make a little like I had a little Halloween witch's tea with some friends, and then for that for that like thing, I'll always stick this song into things. I'm like, oh, Lucy's Party fits in there really well.
I think the one I always use is the Vampire Hunters. That's
nice.
the kind of the what we consider in my head is the traditional theme. I still say that the composer of this wonderful music we've been talking about for 10 minutes is Wojciech Kilar. I don't know of any scores.
Props.
Right, but this is amazing. I'm perfectly. I've used that on many mix for haunted haunted house type stuff, and it's a wonderful thing to have if you have music that you play when trick-or-treaters come on Halloween.
Yes, exactly. Same. If you need to set your creepy, beautiful mood.
Yes. This is the way.
Insert disc here.
Yes.
What evil lurks in the heart of Don Mondo? Only Chucky the Buddha, the enforcer of the Mondo Mafia, knows. Join them each week on the Mondo Method podcast as Chuck tries to get Don Mondo to reveal what is best in life and where he hid the bodies. Oh, they also talk about writing and being professional authors. The Mondo Method podcast with Armand Rosamilia and Chuck Buddha, weekly wherever you find your podcasts.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.